The wide receiver position is near and dear to our hearts. So we are going to break down our top 30 wide receivers in tier list format, go through the pros and cons, go through the upside scenarios, what types of teams that we're drafting these wide receivers for. Some of these guys have, differing benefits like upside and floor and, great offenses and things of that nature. Of course, if you guys get some value from this video, I'm sure a lot of you guys are drafting tonight, tomorrow, potentially next weekend. Let us know down below when your draft is. Leave a like, subscribe, all that good stuff. You know how to get our draft guide. That'll be linked down below in the pinned comment. But Danny, how you doing?
Doing well, doing well. And yeah, as you guys know, if you've been watching us for a while, wide receiver position is the one that we've been basically jumping off the rooftops for the last few months. You guys will hear us, bash running backs, praise wide receivers, but like the running back video, we'll be going through, like Corey said, the pros, the cons, the situational factors, volume factors, talent factors, all of that fun stuff. But let's waste no more time and let's get right into it.
All right, so if you skip the intro, this is our top 30 wide receivers. We're going to go through kind of the pros and cons, the upside cases, where we would feel comfortable drafting these guys. And we got a lot of players to get into, so let's not waste any more time. Justin Jefferson and Ja'Marr Chase, you guys know they're great. You know that they're in pass-heavy offenses. You know that they have great quarterbacks. They're extremely talented players. I'm not breaking any news with any of those statements, but where do you take these guys? Maybe if somebody's just getting back to the fantasy scene, they have no idea where to draft Justin Jefferson, where to draft Ja'Marr Chase. For us, these guys, as you can see by the name of the tier, are the top 2 picks in fantasy football drafts in standard leagues, in half PPR leagues, in full PPR leagues, especially in leagues where you can start up to, 4 wide receivers, 5 wide receivers on any given week. These 2 guys are the cream of the crop.
With Justin Jefferson, you're getting a guy that through his first 3 years as an NFL pro literally has the most receiving yards of all time. Kirk Cousins, solid quarterback, not really much complaining there for him being the first overall player. And then Ja'Marr Chase, a little bit less of a projection in terms of what Justin Jefferson's able to do in commanding targets from a volume standpoint. But what Ja'Marr Chase has in his favor that Justin Jefferson doesn't is an elite quarterback. Joe Burrow, top 3 quarterback in the NFL. Cincinnati Bengals offense, top 5 projection. So not really much to add there.
Yeah, he could run a little hotter on touchdowns. So if you guys are playing in standard and half PPR, maybe Ja'Marr Chase a little bit more appealing there. Mid-first rounders, though, we can move right off of those guys because we know they're great. Mid-first round talent. So these are the guys that we're taking as high as potentially 3rd overall, 4th overall in very wide receiver heavy, 2 wide receiver, 3 wide receiver start, full PPR, 2 flex spot type of leagues. Tyreek Hill, Stephon Diggs, Cooper Kupp, and CeeDee Lamb. The pros for Tyreek Hill, probably the most electric playmaker in NFL history. Legitimately, that's not an exaggeration. He can win you a week on any given play. High target share. Tua's healthy. The only cons really is he's a little bit older and the fact that Tua is a little bit injury prone, but I'm not worried about Tyreek Hill one bit. He is currently my 4th overall player. Stephon Diggs, pros are very long list, right? Very talented player, high track record of high success. Josh Allen, of course, great elite quarterback, pass-heavy offense. He's the number 1 receiver. Cooper Kupp, pros, very, very talented player, Triple Crown winner just 2 years ago, and also a guy that had a legendary upside wide receiver season just 2 years ago as well. The cons with both Stephon Diggs and Cooper Kupp is that they're a little bit older. They could be more susceptible to injuries, but for the most part, they're pretty crystal clear. Kupp has a little bit more of a questionable quarterback situation. As good as Matthew Stafford is, he's dealt with injuries. He's a little bit older. And then CeeDee Lamb is kind of like the mini Stephon Diggs, but a little bit younger. He's, doesn't have as much injury concern, a little bit younger. Pros are, really good quarterback situation, really good offensive situation, probably slightly less pass heavy than the Buffalo Bills will be, but still a pretty pass heavy offense. He's the clear number 1 there. Really, the only cons for CeeDee Lamb are, that he's like 90% of some of these guys in these categories because Dak isn't as good as Joe Burrow. He isn't as good as Josh Allen. He isn't, as good as some of the other guys maybe that we'll talk about later with, AJ Brown having Jalen Hurts throw him the ball. But at the same time, CeeDee Lamb has such a crystal clear projection.
Yeah, no, I will fight back a little bit on the Hurts bit, but I mean, for another video. CeeDee Lamb, like you said, doesn't have the 32% target share that Tyreek Hill showed last year, which is why we can't rank him up there. However, I do think from a tier standpoint that they should be considered in the same area because I do think entering year 4, 24 years old, already took that big step in his 3rd year, that CeeDee Lamb could potentially be in that top 3 tier by this time next year if he goes out and has 110 receptions, 1,600 yards, maybe 12 touchdowns in that Cowboys offense. Because he hasn't shown that quite dominance yet, that's why he's in tier 2. But out of all these guys, he's the one I think realistically by this time next year, 2024 ADP, could be going the highest in your fantasy drafts given the youth that he presents. In terms of Stephon Diggs, that's the other one I really want to talk about is you'll see him for the most part in a lot of your platforms going in the late first, going, the 8, 9, 10, 11 spot. And to me, it just doesn't really make a lot of sense because the situational factors are there. You already mentioned with Josh Allen in that Bills offense. The volume factors are there. He commands, a 28 plus, 29 plus % target share if he stays healthy this year. And the talent factors are there. This is a guy that across the board on reception perception had a 96th percentile or higher grade against man, zone, and press. So really no cons there. And he's a guy I think should be viewed as a top 5 guy that isn't quite viewed in that regard.
Yeah, not to mention, just 2 years ago, he set the reception perception record for success rate versus man coverage. He holds the all-time record for that. So obviously very talented. Where we would feel comfortable taking these guys, I have Tyreek Hill, like I said, rated at 4th overall. Stephon Diggs at 6th overall. CeeDee Lamb and Cooper Kupp. Kupp is at 8th, and Lamb is at 9 for me. So all these guys are top 10 players. Again, scoring format's going to determine some things. If you guys are in half PPR leagues, 2 running back, 2 wide receiver, 1 flex leagues, maybe you elevate some of the running backs, like we talked about yesterday with Bijan, with Eckler, with McCaffrey over some of these wide receivers. But in any kind of formats that favor wide receiver scoring, full PPR, a lot of wide receiver starting spots, I'd feel very, very comfortable walking out of the first round with any one of these guys.
Absolutely. In terms of my ranks, I have Tyreek Hill 4, Stephon Diggs 5, Cooper Kupp 6, and then I have CeeDee Lamb at 8th overall. But the next 4 wide receivers I have are ranked 11th to 14th correspondingly, so we can just move straight to that 1-2 turn tier, headlined by Amon-Ra St. Brown, Garrett Wilson, Devontae Adams, and A.J. Brown. Corey, who's your highest rated of this group?
Yeah, I have Amon-Ra at 11, Garrett Wilson at 13, Devontae at 14, and A.J. Brown at 17. So these guys are all, intermingled with some of the running backs, right? We have, Nick Chubb, Saquon Barkley, Tony Pollard there. Again, depending on scoring format, if you're in half PPR leagues, running backs go off the board heavily. I understand maybe wanting to start your draft with one of these guys, Amon-Ra St. Brown, and a Nick Chubb, and a Saquon Barkley, and a Tony Pollard, or something like that. But I will say, like in high wide receiver scoring formats, you should be able to get some decent value at the 3-4 turn at running back. And therefore, I'm very comfortable going Amon-Ra and Garrett Wilson to start my draft, or Amon-Ra, A.J. Brown, or Devontae Adams to start my draft. All these guys have their own kind of individual concerns, but they're all very high ceiling players still. Pros for Amon-Ra St. Brown, I mean, extremely high target share, just a second-year wide receiver last year, basically a 30% target share when healthy, still has a lot of, place to go up. The only real cons for him is he doesn't have like a ton of deep usage down the field. And, Jared Goff maybe regresses a little bit potentially, but for the most part, he's the number 1 of his team and he has a high ceiling in the red zone as well. Garrett Wilson, big time quarterback upgrade with Aaron Rodgers coming in. He's kind of the, he hasn't done it yet projection, but at the same time, if we have to wait for this guy to do it, you're going to miss out because legitimately he has wide receiver 1, 2, or 3 overall in his range of outcomes. If we get the same Aaron Rodgers that we've seen for the last 15 years of me and Danny's lifetime, most of our lives, Aaron Rodgers has been an elite quarterback in the NFL. Garrett Wilson could absolutely smash this year, basically be the new school version of the guy we have rated right after him in Devontae Adams, who himself, he's a little bit older. He's got a little bit more concerns, more so than the rest of these guys in this area. But Devontae Adams, for my money, is the best real-life receiver in this group. And he has not fallen off. Even though he's a little bit older, even though Jimmy Garoppolo is throwing him the ball, he's still an absolute superstar. Could have 180 targets this year, 14 touchdowns, just like he does pretty much every season. We already saw him overcome the no Aaron Rodgers, narratives last year. Derek Carr and Jimmy Garoppolo, realistically, not that big of a difference. And then with A.J. Brown, I think he's the safest projection of this group, because, Jalen Hurts and the Eagles should be a very good offense. A.J. Brown is the number 1 receiver of that offense. But Devontae Smith, Dallas Goedert, those guys are very much proven target earners in their own right. We don't know if the Eagles will be a little bit more pass heavy than they were last year. They were about middle of the road in terms of overall pass attempts. So I doubt the overall 20, 22 point per game ceiling for A.J. Brown. But if you're looking for a 16 to 19 point per game projection, it doesn't get much cleaner.
Yeah, 100%. And in terms of the young guys, so we'll talk about the young guys first real quick. I like envisioning, scenarios where this time next year, what they can develop into. And for Amon-Ra St. Brown, I think the projection is, given his usage, given his slot role, maybe he develops into this year's Cooper Kupp. And I can envision that Cooper Kupp obviously being in that mid-first rounders tier, Amon-Ra St. Brown either closing the gap or potentially overtaking him this year in that Lions offense. In terms of Garrett Wilson, I think stylistically, it could be what Stephon Diggs represents, where, Stephon Diggs, once he got traded to Buffalo, got attached to Josh Allen. Obviously, Josh Allen wasn't even proven as much of course, Aaron Rodgers is at this point in his career. I understand Aaron Rodgers had a poor 2022 season, but prior to that, he was the back-to-back MVP. So I do think if Garrett Wilson does develop, Obviously, having that great quarterback play, he could be potentially this year's Stephon Diggs in that situation in New York. In terms of Devontae Adams and A.J. Brown, I would say they're safer compared to Amon-Ra and Garrett Wilson, given, their real-life talent levels. Devontae Adams, like you said, older player, don't really trust the offensive situation. And with A.J. Brown, if he had an offense that was throwing the ball 600, 650 times, like if he was in Jamar Chase's situation, he probably would be where Chase is regarded as that top 2 pick. The only real concern I have is that the Eagles just simply do not throw the ball at a volume rate that some of these other teams do.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, if you guys want all of our rankings, our risk ratings, all that stuff is available in our draft guide. So if you draft today, if you draft tomorrow, if you draft next weekend, you definitely want to get yourself access to it. And you can get access to it for just $10 when signing up on Underdog Fantasy using the promo code FSE. You'll get 100% back on whatever you put in, and you'll get our draft guide and our weekly start sit rankings for free for the entire season to help you out. And as well, if you guys already have an Underdog account, or if you can't play Underdog where you live, you can get it on our site, flockfantasy.com/FSE as well. So the next tier that we have here is the late second rounders, the early third rounders. This group, I mean, there's a little bit of, me and you have a little bit of disagreement at the end of this tier, but the main guys that make up this tier that we both have pretty consensus is Calvin Ridley, Jalen Waddle, T. Higgins, and Devontae Smith. With Calvin Ridley, there's, the con is that he hasn't done it in a couple of years. He's a little bit volatile for that reason, but I could name you a list of pros with this guy, man. High pass attempt, high up-tempo offense, quarterback who should take a massive step forward this year, a proven alpha target earner who's, proven it on an NFL field with the likes of Julio Jones and a rookie year Kyle Pitts. He is an awesome, awesome projection, a big time ceiling swing in that early third round area. And then with Waddle, with Higgins, and with Smith, you're getting all number 2 wide receivers, but all of these guys are pretty clean projections. It's going to be all good offenses. All offenses we expect to be top 12, top 15, and all of these offenses have the potential to absolutely smash and be outlier, magical seasons. The only problem is with Jalen Waddle, T. Higgins, and Devontae Smith, we're drafting one of their teammates higher than them. And they are probably capped as low-end wide receiver 1s, high-end wide receiver 2s, unless Jamar Chase, A.J. Brown, or Tyreek Hill go down with an injury. But nonetheless, they're very safe projections. So if you guys are more risk-averse in the early rounds and you don't like taking big shots on, let's say a Calvin Ridley, a guy that, is a little bit more volatile, then I don't mind going after one of these clean projections either.
Yeah, and for what it's worth, they are tiers for a reason. Like if you're on that 2-3 turn, even though we have maybe Jalen Waddle or T. Higgins rated higher than Devontae Smith in our consensus, if you get Jalen Hurts at the end of the second round, like it would make more sense for you to go with Devontae Smith. We already outlined, of course, with Calvin Ridley. It's basically the similar situation to Garrett Wilson in terms of play style, yards after catch, route running ability, now landing on a potential MVP level quarterback there in Jacksonville with Trevor Lawrence. Like you said, the con he hasn't played, but we're willing to overlook the cons given the upside case there. I think if he didn't have those cons, if he's been playing elite football for the last 2 years, he'd be honestly going in at least this tier, if not in this tier, with Tyreek, Diggs, Cooper Kupp, and CeeDee Lamb. So definitely worth taking that shot at this point of your drafts. Jalen Waddle, T. Higgins, and Devontae Smith. I kind of just rank this in terms of the efficiency as well as the offensive volume. So for the efficiency standpoint, Jalen Waddle, we know on 130 targets, he can still give you 1,300, 1,350 yards. With T. Higgins, it's of course the offensive passing volume there in Cincinnati. The reason why Devontae Smith slightly lags behind them is, although I think he's the best wide receiver of this trio, I do think in Philadelphia, given what we can expect from a volume standpoint, I kind of have to adjust him appropriately. But it wouldn't shock me if Devontae Smith honestly outscored A.J. Brown this year.
Yeah, I think of that trio, he's actually the most likely to outscore the receiver in front of him. So I actually have him like right there. Like I have him ahead of Higgins actually. And I think there's a real argument to be made between him and Waddle, because I don't think there's a chance that Waddle outscores Tyreek Hill. I don't think there's a chance that T. Higgins outscores Jamar Chase. I could see it possible that Devontae Smith is at least very close to what A.J. Brown can put up. And also, I don't think it's out of the range of outcomes that now that Jalen Hurts is proven himself as an elite level MVP caliber quarterback, that they open up the offense a little bit more and let him throw a little bit more than they did last year. So all of these guys, crystal clear projections. We can move on to the guys that are at the end of this tier. So you have Chris Olave amongst these guys. I have Deebo Samuel amongst these guys. For Olave, I'll give the cons and then you give the pros. Since you're higher on Olave, the reason I have him a little bit lower is because even though he's a great talent and he's going to take a big step forward this year and he had a great rookie season, I don't really trust the Saints offense. I think Dennis Allen might be one of the worst head coaches in the NFL. The scheme is not the same Saints that we saw with Sean Payton. And Chris Olave and Derek Carr, as much as they're like a pretty decent match from a quarterback wide receiver tandem, Derek Carr is a little bit more willing to push the ball downfield. Potentially, Chris Olave had a lot of unrealized air yards last year when it came to like Andy Dalton and Jameis Winston throwing him the football. I'm just not 100% bought in on this offense. I don't really want pieces of this New Orleans Saints team, a team that I think will be one of the most run-heavy offenses in the league. They have 3 capable running backs once Kamara gets back from injury. And also, Michael Thomas is healthy. Alvin Kamara will command targets in the backfield. We have Taysom Hill, obviously, can do some stuff on the goal line and be a pest from that perspective. I think Chris Olave is the best talent here, and I think he'll be the number 1 receiver, and the target share and all that stuff will be great. I'm just a little bit concerned that he doesn't have a wide receiver 5 finish in his range of outcomes. He might be like Waddle, Higgins, and Smith, more capped at that like wide receiver 10 to 15 range. But at least with those guys, I'm getting the insulation of their offenses.
Yeah, no, it's definitely fair. And honestly, I'm a little bit lower on Olave compared to the consensus as well. He's a more early to mid 3rd round pick for me. Whereas on Underdog Fantasy, he's going in the mid to late 2nd round. In terms of his pros, it's really just betting on a stud rookie talent potentially taking that next step. I understand from a median projection standpoint that Chris Olave, given the offense, given, the run first nature, given the slow pace of play there in New Orleans, doesn't really project well, but it's just a matter of him potentially developing into, the Devontae Smith, the T. Higgins, the Jalen Waddle, possibly even better in terms of real life standing. So if he does take that step, if he does potentially command, 28+% of the targets, takes even further of a talent gap from what we saw last year, where he was 1,000-yard wide receiver despite missing a few games. I think the range of outcomes, like you said, the ceiling's probably capped at maybe wide receiver 8 in terms of points per game, but I do think he's a safe projection to finish in that wide receiver 8 to wide receiver 15, 16 range. So I'm okay with him, but like you said, I'm still favoring guys like Calvin Ridley who have a very high ceiling comparative to him.
Yeah, and the reason I have Debo 1 spot ahead of him is because I think Debo also has that high ceiling as well. Even though Samuel, I would say, is absolutely more risky than Olave because, he's a little bit older. He has, a bit of an injury concern. We know that Debo Samuel is extremely efficient. At least he was 2 years ago when he finished as a top 3 receiver. We have a very clear quarterback situation now in San Francisco. Now that Trey Lance has been traded to the Cowboys, we have Brock Purdy as the clear starter there. There's a lot of mouths to feed. I know a lot of people will stay away from 49ers players for that reason, but I look at that as a good thing. I look at that as from the mindset of a defensive coordinator. How are you possibly going to stop Christian McCaffrey, Debo Samuel, Brandon Ayuk, George Kittle, all in the field at the same time? They have secondary contributors like Juszczyk and other guys there that can do some things as well. For me, I just want pieces of this offense. I think they're going to be one of the best offenses in the NFL, and Debo Samuel has the highest fantasy ceiling proven in the past of these guys, and he gets used in all facets of the game. So no matter what game script it is, he can be used on the ground in the goal line situations. He can be used out of the backfield. He could be used on, pass-heavy game scripts when they have to throw the ball. He is the most versatile piece that they have, and he looked like a man possessed in the preseason so far, and I absolutely want shares of Debo Samuel. 2 years ago, he way overperformed expectations relative to the volume that he saw. Last year was the opposite. He regressed a lot more than he should have. He was still a top 20 receiver in kind of usage. And I think that this year, he's pretty much a stone cold lock for like a top 15 receiver, assuming he stays healthy.
Yeah, I mean, the reason why I have Debo in the 4th rounders tier, again, it's a very micro difference. I have him rated actually as my 36th overall player, but I would rather get him in the 4th round if I can, simply because the quarterback's there. But when it comes to Debo Samuel, the reason why I do have him in that 4th rounders tier with his teammate Brandon Ayuk is I don't really think there's much separation in terms of overall talent, in terms of potential usage in this offense compared to him and Brandon Ayuk. Brandon Ayuk actually outscored him last year. So I would rather bet personally at Ayuk at cost. But again, with Debo Samuel, there's not really much I can critique. Obviously, with the ball in his hands, one of the best playmakers in the entire NFL, 25+% target share. And if Brock Purdy, that's another thing I'm a little bit worried about. I think he's a little bit more volatile than you're letting on. But if he does show that he can be the quarterback that he saw last year, maybe with an extra offseason in that Shanahan system, with the Trey Lance noise out of his head, and he can continue that level of play, I do think Debo Samuel could pay off. I'm fine with him at this ADP. 3-4 turns about where I'd feel comfortable taking him. But if it's like the 306, 307, I just think that's too early in my personal rankings.
Yeah, I think if we looked at Brock Purdy as like a rookie quarterback, had he been a 1st-round pick and done what he did, we'd be talking about him as potentially a massive breakout candidate this year. So,
sure.
I mean, the fact that he was like a top 12 quarterback in EPA per play, and I get it, Shanahan's scheme, anybody can be an efficient quarterback, but it still doesn't take away from the fact that he was a 7th-round rookie that did this. So I actually think it's way more likely he takes a step forward than it is he takes a step back. But like you said, there is some volatility baked in there. to the Deebo Samuel. And for what it's worth, I love Ayuk at his price tag as well. And we can get right into the 4th rounders tier here. There's a lot of guys in this tier, so I'll briefly go through the pros and cons of all of them, and then we'll kind of highlight which ones you like more so than the others. So let's go through them real quick. Amari Cooper, pros. He's been very productive for a number of years. Deshaun Watson's coming in full-time this year, full-time starter this time instead of a 6-game, absence. And if Deshaun Watson gets back to his old style of play, then Amari Cooper's going to be a huge beneficiary of that. The cons is that he's Amari Cooper. He sometimes disappears. He sometimes gets, deals with injuries.
Liz Franks.
Yeah, like he's difficult, man. He's a volatile player, and I get people like not wanting to, fade him because of what he did last year. But I'm a little bit more concerned about Amari Cooper, and then I'll rattle off Metcalf as well. We'll talk about these two guys in tandem first. With DK Metcalf, he kind of has to run hot on touchdowns this year to pay off at his ADP, because when they've been on the field, him and Lockett are not all that different from a target share perspective. Then you throw into the mix JSN, who's a very talented rookie receiver. He's going to miss a few games by the sounds of it, maybe a game or two at the beginning of the year. So early on in the season, I like Metcalf and Lockett, but I think both of those guys, I would just rather take whoever's cheapest, and that's Lockett. So that's why I'm a little lower on Metcalf as well.
Yeah, and in terms of Drake London, Christian Watson, these are the young second-year breakout wide receivers that should be priced in the 4th round, but in some of your home leagues may fall to the 5th, may fall to the 6th round because they don't have that I've seen it before factor. Even though, we talked about Christian Watson lately, but once he got that full-time role down the stretch, was the wide receiver 8 overall in fantasy, and with Drake London commanded a near 30% target share as a rookie. Anytime I can get access to them potentially developing into, maybe this year's CeeDee Lamb, maybe this year's T. Higgins, this year's Jalen Waddle, this year's Devontae Smith, I want to take chances on it. And I understand there's cons for both of them. With Drake London, we don't exactly know what the pass-to-run ratio for the Falcons is going to be. We obviously saw last year they were a historically run-dominant team at an 8th overall pick running back. So I get the overall passing volume could be a concern. But I do look at the rosy side of it, where they had Marcus Mariota last year. And if you guys didn't watch Marcus Mariota in the preseason, he looked absolutely lost. I just need Desmond Ridder to be the quarterback 23, 24 overall in real life for this for this Atlanta Falcons team. And I do think the personnel could take them to be a potential above average offense. So if Desmond Ridder just isn't a complete pumpkin, I think Drake London will hit. And if he's actually a pretty solid quarterback, I think Drake London could smash him. With Christian Watson, same thing with Jordan Love. If Jordan Love's a solid, average, maybe slightly below average quarterback, Christian Watson showed what he could do with the ball in his hands just in his rookie year.
Yeah, and it's weird because when Jordan Love was coming out of Utah State, he had like a comp, of Jameis Winston type of quarterback. Yep. A lot of people kind of view him as like this safe quarterback. Like he's really not. Like he's the type of guy that could really elevate Christian Watson's game if he's learned what he needed to learn from Aaron Rodgers. And the perfect type of quarterback to learn from, if you're a volatile, like put it into harm's way too much quarterback, is potentially the safest quarterback that we've ever seen in terms of ball security. There's been stretches of games where Aaron Rodgers hasn't thrown picks for like multiple years. Like we're talking about a guy that would have been perfect to learn from if you're Jordan Love, and whether Rodgers was susceptible to it or not is not important. Christian Watson and Drake London, I think, have the best chance of like returning, potentially they could be 2nd round picks this time next year. You know what I mean? Like these guys could absolutely smash, which is why we have them rated here. They're risky. So if you go, with a safer draft strategy early on in the draft, you want to deviate for a potential high upside guy, you can do that. But if you draft, let's say a Breece Hall in the 3rd round or something, maybe stick to, Amari Cooper, DK Metcalf, Brandon Ayuk, DJ Moore, Mike Williams, Keenan Allen, the guys that we're going to talk about here. Ayuk, we kind of outlined with Deebo Samuel. Give us pieces of this offense. He's extremely talented. He's been tearing up camp. It seems like he does every year, but especially this year, he's been awesome. Again, home leagues, he's going to fall to the 5th, 6th round. Easy value there for Brandon Ayuk. DJ Moore also has, like, kind of with Watson and London, a little bit more upside because Justin Fields has the potential to take a big step forward. He was a highly decorated prospect. He took a big step forward as a 2nd-year quarterback last year. And even though, advanced metrics say he wasn't a good passer, he didn't have anybody to throw the ball to. So if DJ Moore can come in, they, repair the offense around Justin Fields. He gets another season under his belt, offseason under his belt to kind of work with his receivers and get more comfortable in the NFL. It's very possible that Justin Fields has a Jalen Hurts-like ascension. Do I think he's going to be, an MVP caliber quarterback and lead his team to the Super Bowl? Not necessarily, but it's possible that he's at least a much better quarterback than he was last year. And that would be, by the way, easily the best quarterback that DJ Moore has ever played with. So he has the potential to finally have like a top 15 season in his range of outcomes. He's obviously been the type of guy that's been a 25, 27% target share throughout the course of his season. And then Mike Williams and Keenan Allen, we want pieces of this Chargers offense. They're going to throw the ball a lot. Keenan Allen's your safer target share guy. Mike Williams, your more volatile, boomer bust, weekly winning ceiling type of guy. So whatever kind of archetype you prefer, half PPR and standard, maybe you go Mike Williams, full PPR, you go Keenan Allen. Those guys are kind of interchangeable to me. I have Keenan Allen higher because my rankings are full PPR.
Yeah, I mean, I have Mike Williams higher simply because I'm building in a little bit of volatility with Keenan Allen as an older wide receiver potentially falling off. I just think there's a possibility where he develops maybe into what we saw from late career Jarvis Landry, which in fantasy, if he ends up being 120 targets, but he's not giving you that same yards after catch he was in his prime, I'm a little bit concerned there. But I do think fourth, fifth round is still a safe projection for him. Really, I just think the fourth rounders tier for the most part is your conviction tier, is your, pick your flavor. What do you like in a fantasy wide receiver? We're not looking at Stephon Diggs anymore. We're not looking at Tyreek Hill. We're not looking at Cooper Kupp, CeeDee Lamb. We're not looking at these crystal clean projections. So really, depending on what you value, do you value situation? Maybe you take a guy like Mike Williams. Do you value, overall volume of his offense? Maybe you take a guy like Drake London. Do you want that, game-breaking type of weak potential? Maybe you take a guy like DK Metcalf or Christian Watson. Really, it's just to pick your flavor tier, and depending on how you want to construct your wide receiver room, and maybe even pending what you did earlier in the draft. If you took a guy like Garrett Wilson, who's a more, upside type of play, maybe you play it safer and go with a guy like Mike Williams or a guy like Drake London. Whereas if you go with a guy like AJ Brown, maybe you want some more upside built into your wide receiver room. Really, all of these guys are talented. All of these guys have the upside case to potentially be higher picks in fantasy this time next year.
Yeah, I think the key point that you made there is what did you do earlier in the draft? I think championships, man, they're going to be won and lost in these mid rounds with these wide receivers. Very good chance that half of these guys disappoint. Very good chance that 2 or 3 of these guys absolutely crush, and a very good chance that 2 or 3 of these guys are horrible. So it's realistically, it's going to come down to like who's winning championships is probably going to come down to who can hit on these mid-round receivers. The guys, in my opinion, that have the best chance of crushing from this tier, Drake London, Christian Watson, Brandon Ayuk, and DJ Moore. The guys that have the biggest chance of busting from this tier, DK Metcalf and Keenan Allen. The guys that could just be like just fine, but maybe not killing you and not crushing, Amari Cooper and Mike Williams. That's kind of how I view this tier of receivers. We can move down to the next tier, which is more your 5th and 6th round guys there. If you want to scroll down a little bit, Danny, so they can kind of see it. You can see there we have Tyler Lockett, Chris Godwin, Deontay Johnson, Terry McLaurin, Jahan Dotson, Christian Kirk, and DeAndre Hopkins. So this would close out our top 30 consensus. I have Christian Kirk as 30. You have DeAndre Hopkins as 30. So this is technically our top 31. But with Tyler Lockett, I mean, you're getting access to a good offense. You get the price discount versus DK Metcalf. It's a similar projection, similar target share. I like Tyler Lockett a little bit more just at his price because I can get him in the 5th, 6th round as opposed to the 4th round. Chris Godwin is the type of guy that everybody in a casual league is going to be scared of because Baker Mayfield is his quarterback. But the bottom line is this guy's been a top 15 receiver every year of his career outside of, when he was a backup behind Deshaun Jackson. So with Chris Godwin, yeah, he doesn't have Tom Brady anymore, but Tom Brady wasn't good last year, and he was playing on one ACL, and he literally was still a top 15 receiver in points per game. So give me the target share, give me the offensive production that is going to be funneled to Chris Godwin because he's exactly the type of receiver that Baker Mayfield has gravitated towards in the past. He made Jarvis Landry a very productive receiver in his prime in Cleveland. Deontay Johnson, I've been impressed with the Steelers offense in preseason games. I actually like Deontay Johnson was a good target projection the whole time, right? We all knew, target share had no touchdowns last year, but that was likely to regress positively. I'm starting to think that Deontay Johnson might have a higher ceiling than people realize because if Kenny Pickett is a legitimate mid-level quarterback or better, if he's a Kirk Cousins level quarterback, like Deontay Johnson might legitimately finish as a wide receiver 1. He finished as a wide receiver 1 with Ben Roethlisberger his final season. Like we're talking about a horrid NFL quarterback that he's a future Hall of Famer, but he was washed up. And Deontay Johnson was a wide receiver 1 in fantasy with him.
Yeah, I mean, Ben Roethlisberger, for what it's worth in that season, I believe he got like elbow surgery in the offseason. Like there was videos of him throwing a football in a gym and like it barely getting to the other wall, which was like 30 feet away. Like his arm was completely cooked in that year. And yet Deontay Johnson was able to show that he's quite quarterback proof. And for what it's worth, if Kenny Pickett, like you said, does take that step up, maybe we do see a higher comparative ceiling. But for the most part, when we're looking at this tier, I think outside of Jahan Dotson, who's like the breakout candidate, the breakout profile of this tier, they're pretty safe projections, whether it's because of their offense or whether it's because of their volume. So guys like Chris Godwin, Deontay Johnson, DeAndre Hopkins kind of showed that while we don't have the highest expectations for their offense, we know they're going to flirt with 27, 28, maybe even 29% of their team's targets. With guys like Chris Godwin, Deontay Johnson, Terry McLaurin, DeAndre Hopkins, you're kind of banking on a high target share, safe type of projection. With guys like Tyler Lockett, Christian Kirk, you're banking on the offense potentially being very good over there in Seattle and over there in Jacksonville. And then with Jahan Dotson, I mean, he showed what he was able to do on a per route basis last year. He showed that he can really score from any point in the field, whether it was deep targets, intermediate targets with the ball in his hands, or even once they got down to the red zone, we did see him getting looks there. I would say out of these guys, it feels the most exciting when you draft a guy like Jahan Dotson, but depending on, of course, what you did in the last round. If you got Christian Watson, maybe you lean towards a Chris Godwin, DeAndre Hopkins, Deontay Johnson type rather than a Jahan Dotson in that instance.
Yeah, again, this is another pick your flavor tier. And for what it's worth, Terry McLaurin would be in the 4th rounders tier if he wasn't injured.
Yes.
Because he got injured. He, suffered a turf toe injury or whatever it was, as would Jerry Jeudy, by the way, who is not even on this list. We moved him outside of our top 30s. I have him right now as my wide receiver 36. He's right around the range of Jackson Smith and Jigba, who's also dealing with an injury. Like, I would rather take Marquise Brown, Michael Pittman, Mike Evans, and Jordan Addison, who are just outside of this range, kind of as honorable mentions to our top 30. So, I mean, do you have anything else to add on this area of the draft? I think we can probably wrap this up.
No, nothing in particular. Obviously, of course, once you get into this range, 4th, 5th round area, like you're going to want to take as many of these wide receivers because this is when the RB dead zone happens in a lot of your home leagues. So keep an eye on these guys. Don't just feel like you have to force, Aaron Jones in the 4th round over Brandon Ayuk when Brandon Ayuk has a clear higher upside case, in my opinion, for fantasy. In terms where I have these guys ranked, so Tyler Lockett, Chris Godwin, Terry McLaurin are my 51 through 53. Deontay Johnson, Jahan Dotson, DeAndre Hopkins, and Christian Kirk are my 58 through 61. So like I said, not much conviction between those guys, and really just depending on how you guys view the tiers, you can pick them accordingly.
Yeah, I think an interesting exercise that we could kind of go through real quick is like where the quarterbacks and tight ends fit in here. Because like we said, we're not really drafting a lot of running backs in this area, although like the Kenneth Walker types, as we've talked about, could fit in amongst this 4th, 5th, and 6th round range. But I will say, like Lamar Jackson and Joe Burrow, for me, quarterback 4 and 5, I would take over everybody in the 4th rounders tier. Like the second those late 2nd to 3rd rounders are off the board, and even potentially over Debo and Chris Olave, you could make the argument for a guy like Lamar Jackson. And then when it comes to the tight end position, I have George Kittle at 43, which is right behind DJ Moore, Christian Watson, and Drake London. So he fits into me right around exactly where his teammate Brandon Ayuk is in terms of his position, the advantage that he gives you there. Where Justin Herbert, Justin Fields, Trevor Lawrence, TJ Hawkinson, those other onesies kind of fit into me, and then Kyle Pitts as well. I have Justin Herbert at 51, which is right behind Chris Godwin and Tyler Lockett, so he's right in that range for me, and then he kind of kicks off that tier where like Hawkinson's at 53, Justin Fields is at 55, Trevor Lawrence at 56, Kyle Pitts at 59, so they're all kind of intermingled. Once you see some of those wide receivers that are, representing good offensive projections like Lockett, like Keenan Allen, like Mike Williams, like DJ Moore go off the board, that's when I'm willing to deviate away for a quarterback or for a tight end over somebody like Deontay Johnson, Terry McLaurin, Jahan Dotson, Christian Kirk, DeAndre Hopkins, somebody like that.
Yeah, 100%. And in terms of my dead zone quarterback and tight ends, so Lamar Jackson at 30, Joe Burrow 35, Justin Fields at 40, Herbert and Lawrence at 45 and 46 respectively. I do have the quarterbacks as a whole kind of lumped a little bit higher. And then 3 in a row, Hawkinson, Kittle, Pitts at tight end. And in terms of the other quarterbacks and tight ends in this range, it's really just Darren Waller at 69 and Deshaun Watson at 79.
Yeah, and then I have Waller and Deshaun Watson right outside of the Hopkins range as well. I have Waller in the late 60s, and then I also have Watson in the early 70s. So if you guys enjoyed this video, of course, leave a like down below. Subscribe to the channel if you are new. We're going to be coming at you with all of our superlatives next week. So if you guys have your drafts Labor Day weekend, we'll have you covered with a ton more content. If you guys have your drafts this weekend, of course, good luck. And if you want our help with your drafts, of course, you can get our draft guide right now for just a $10 deposit on Underdog Fantasy. Promo code FSE will get you that $10 deposit, 100% back up to $100. Get you our redraft rankings manifesto 2.0, our draft guide for free, as well as our weekly rankings for free. And our draft guide will be updated when you guys are seeing this. So all of our rankings have been up to date since the Jeudy injury, since the McLaurin injury, since some of the preseason usage that we've seen over the past couple days. So if you draft today or you draft tomorrow, that stuff will all be up to date for you. No worries there. And of course, if you can't play Underdog or if you already have an Underdog account, you can get our draft guide on flockfantasy.com. Promo code FSE gets you 30% off over there. Of course, sign up for an annual membership. We got you covered all season long. We'll have you covered. If you sign up for an annual, you'll be covered till next draft season. You'll have all the dynasty season covered. You'll have all the rookie stuff covered, and we have a ton of content planned over there. So with that being said, peace out, and we'll talk to you soon.